We now return to murder.
Oh my, the gentleman is deceased without question. He's dead.
Locum student Mr. Naruhodo Esquire.
Mr. Natsume.
Oh, why? Why is this happening? Why to me? I've only just got out of court yesterday. I was finally home after 2 days of misery. And then I wake up the next day to this. No early bird should catch a worm like this. Woeful worm without wiggle.
I see you're in high spirits again this morning, Mr. Mustache.
Ah, not the horrible hairlock Sholmes. Shoo, shove off, show yourself the door, I never invited you.
Mr. Sholmes came here with us. I'm quite sure he'll be able to help you, Mr. Natsume. I'm entirely at your disposal, Mr. Mustache. What can I do for you? Here they are, already. The busybodies. Ah, Inspector Gregson. What a pleasant surprise. Pleasant, is it? Gives me heartburn every time I see your face at a crime scene, Sholmes. Ha, I deduce, Inspector, that your heartburn is as a result of your excessive consumption of fried food. Good morning, Inspector. This is a crime scene. Don't you go touching anything. Or good morning to you too, Sunshine. Okay, I guess we get to examine some things. Let's look around first. Oi! I said hands off! You're gonna mess up my crime scene. Oh, no, I just wanted to look, that's all. Not a chance. I know you're kind. You'll mess it up just by looking at it. Someone's in a bad mood. There's certainly some bad air in here, isn't there? Alright, it sounds like I'd better talk to the inspector first and try to curry some favor. Very well, then. So, Inspector, what was the victim's name? Who was he? Mr. William Shamspeare. He's a lodger here. As you can probably tell, he was an actor. A bit of a dead loss, as it happens. Or just dead. Mr. Shamspeare? He was the landlord, or Mr. Geradeb, and the other lodger, Mr. Natsume, who found him. The fellow didn't rise at his usual hour, so Geradeb got worried and kicked the door down. Does he not have a key? But doesn't Mr. Geradeb have a bad leg? Ah, yes, you're right there. It was that jittery Japanese hunchback over there actually did the kicking. Really? Soseki-san? The victim was pretty hard up, it seems, even done some time inside for petty crimes. He had no money, no place to go, and no friends. His only acquaintances were the people in his house. Miserable life, that, and a miserable end to it. So what exactly is Mr. Natsume still doing here? He's not involved in the investigation, so shouldn't you have sent him away from the crime scene? Well, I'm not saying it's because the fellow looks odd or anything, or that he acts suspicious. I thought it would be prudent to take a statement from the cohabitor. You nearly said culprit there, didn't you? Oh dear, Mr. Natsume appears to be under suspicion again. It certainly seems that way. He does just come across as such an odd fellow, doesn't he? Poor man, how unfortunate. Anyway, I can't say much until the coroner gets here. But I don't think the fellow's been gone that long. The body's still warm. Even if the inspector would allow it, I don't think I could bring myself to touch a dead body. Okay, can we look around now? Apparently there's nothing to look at. Everything's been checked off for me already. Ooh. This must be Soseki-san. What a terrible thing to have happened.
It's only been 3 days since I was arrested for the incident on the pavement outside. And then, having finally regained my freedom, it starts happening all over again. Endless existence of excruciating experiences.
So the victim lived here on the ground floor, and your room is just one story up, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. In a way, we were neighbors, I suppose.
So did you know the victim? Were you friends? What's the matter with Soseki-san now? It was an innocent enough question, wasn't it? Why does he seem so shaken by it?
Well, I suppose he wasn't a complete stranger. But did he ever invite me to this room? Never. On my honor, I swear it.
Extreme reaction. You're probably wishing you'd never asked now, aren't you, Mr. Naruhodo?
When we found him here, I felt wretched, which is why I sent word asking you to come. Through that inspector over there.
What are you doing, Sholmes? Mr. Sholmes, what are you doing? Ha! You only need observe to know it, my dear fellow. Investigating naturally. There's nothing natural about that pose. Mr. Sholmes, have you made some miraculous discovery? Patience, my dear madam, patience. We've not been here in this room 5 minutes. So far, all I've managed to deduce is what actually happened. My goodness! But isn't that everything we need to know, Mr. Sholmes? Now that you propose the idea, I believe one could indeed see it that way. At the present time, I have managed to draw 2 incontrovertible conclusions. The first, that there was a physical struggle here last night, in which the victim fought for his life. Mr. Natsume, what's wrong? Is something that Mr. Sholmes said significant somehow?
No, don't mind me. Forget I was here.
And my second conclusion is that there was a poison lingering in the air here last night that passed the victim's lips.
Nonsense.
All right, Mr. Natsume, why are you reacting so extremely to Mr. Sholmes' deductions?
No, please, pretend I'm not here. Invisible, ineffable, inscrutable, insignificant.
Impossible to ignore. You must tell us everything, Mr. Sholmes. Spare no detail. But of course, let the theatrical tragedy before us be unraveled by my great deductions, presented for your pleasure in 2 acts. We've heard some truly astounding great deductions from Mr. Sholmes in the past. No doubt this will be no exception. What miracles will unfold before our eyes this time? So, my dear fellows, for your delight and wonder, let the curtain rise. For Herlock Sholmes's Logic and Reasoning Spectacular, Act 1. Game is afoot. Cause of death. Careful observation of the victim reveals to us the events that transpired in this disconsolate room last night. Foam at the mouth of the deceased clearly indicates the use of poison. Okay, but I guess I can't do anything to that reaction yet. Next to the victim, we notice a large dining plate which contains, you will observe, 1/2 of a sizable bar of soap. Meaningful? Indubitably. Why is this soap set so purposely upon the dish? Like the victim's Last Supper, in fact. Yes. Could it be that the man was about to eat it? Of course, the fork reveals the answer. Okay, we're getting a lot of clue marks there. It appears that the young man's appetite was his undoing. Taking up arms in the form of his cutlery, the victim engaged in a deadly battle for his life. Yet the struggle against his hunger was in vain, for in the end he couldn't resist devouring the slippery feast. But London's foul soap is besmirched by foul poison. Yes, the victim's life was claimed by poison that tainted the contents of the plate. The soap and the lather about the young man's mouth are too perfectly matched to ignore. The cause of death was clearly intoxication due to excessive ingestion of foul soap. Though personally, I have a greater interest in the taste of foul candle wax, of course. There's a lot of markers that popped up there. Suicide or murder? Cause of death identified. Oh, sorry. The cause of death identified. We proceed to Act 2. But we ponder the next question. Was this suicide or murder? The audience will recall the death. The audience will recall the death occurred during the victim's last supper. Did the man dine and die alone? His single teacup suggests an answer. To draw a conclusion on such meager evidence would be foolish, however, certainly. The careful criminal could have absconded with his own cup to cover his tracks. Well, allow me to lift the veil of doubt, my dear fellow. Indeed, what reveals the answer, of course, is the broken lock. Though forced open now at the time of the incident, this door was locked. The sole key was in the victim's pocket. In other words, when the victim consumed the poison, he must have been alone. Alone with his inferior soap, from whence wafted an inferior scent. What are we talking about? And with that acrid aroma lingering in the air, the victim met his end in tragic solitude. We can take comfort only in the fact that his soul was well cleansed on its way to the hereafter. No possible perpetrator present. Thus concludes the final act of Sherlock Holmes's Great Deduction. Sure. There's just one thing, Mr. Sholmes. Are you disposed to identify just one thing? You are disposed to identifying just one thing, aren't you, Mr. Naruhodo? Pray, wow. Pray, what concerns you? Well, no matter how hungry he was, do you really think the man would have eaten soap? It is quite apparent that this man had barely a penny to his name. It is a curious thing, but to one so destitute, soap can suddenly appear quite irresistibly appetizing. How extraordinary. In truth, I have tried a little soap myself in the past. You've eaten it, you mean? My dear fellow, it was some time ago now. My postulation was that it would cleanse my gut. And did it? As I writhed in agony on the floor and spilled the contents of my stomach, yes, I believe it did. The experience taught me a valuable lesson. Soap is quite poisonous. It has an unpleasant taste and leads to great discomfort. In summary, I cannot recommend it. Believe me, I wouldn't eat it even if you did. There's something that troubles me as well, actually. Oh, what's that? It's Mr. Natsume.
Ah!
I couldn't help noticing him shuddering and quivering out of the corner of my eye, almost as if Mr. Sholmes's deductions touched a nerve somehow.
No, nonsense.
Well, that clenched teeth episode didn't last. I think, judging by Mr. Natsume's reaction, the great detective's deductions may need some gentle corrections in order to reach the actual truth. Yes, Mr. Sholmes's observations and deductions are sometimes a little too sharp. He has a tendency to hit the nail on the side of the head and drive it in at an obtuse angle. When he does that, it falls to us to straighten things out. Alright then, let's see what we can do. Yes, we must pick out the key words in Mr. Sholmes's quite brilliant deductions, and discreetly exchange them for something that makes a little more sense. If we can do that, I'm sure we'll arrive at what Mr. Sholmes meant to say in the first place. In that case, are you ready for the second performance of the day? Once again, my dear fellows, for your continued delight and wonder, let the curtain rise for Sherlock Holmes's Logic and Reasoning Spectacular, Act 1. Course correction. Na-na-na. Foam of the mouth clearly indicates poison. How... Okay, now it's where we... Well, you can't deny that a fork implies the man was eating something, or about to eat something. Yes, that's true. If I were to decide to eat some soap, I should prefer to use a fork than to attempt it with chopsticks. And of course, only half the bar of soap is left on the plate. But might there not be some other explanation? Something material that proves whether or not the man really ate the soap? I mean... Are we not allowed to look at this stuff? I suppose you'd eat soap with a fork, wouldn't you? I don't think that's a question of which implement you'd use. You shouldn't eat soap, full stop. But then why? Why does the man have a fork in his hand? Oh dear, I understand your frustration, Mr. Naruhodo, but please don't take it out on me. The point is, if we decide the man used his fork to eat the soap, we wouldn't be changing Mr. Sholmes' deduction. So we really ought to consider some other clues. Okay. Wait a minute, is this... There we go. Ooh, there you go. Look at that. The other piece of soap. Look, there's more soap on the floor here. Mr. Shamspear must really have loved this stuff. Let's not jump to conclusions, Mr. Naruhodo. Look closely at this soap. Do you see that it would fit together perfectly with the half bar on the table? What the... How can that be? I think that they are two halves of the same bar that broke apart. Do you think he was drinking tea with his soap? The cup's empty, so there's no way of knowing. How about this for an idea? Perhaps the cup was full of water, and he was dissolving soap in it so he could gulp as much down as possible. Please remember that he may not have actually been the soap lover that he's been made out to be. Okay. We can't go further that way, we can't go further that way, and I can't go up or down. So, I guess we... I guess we look at this thing then. We have to present the other piece of soap, because that's about the only thing we can present, yeah?
Take that!
Could it be that the man was about to eat it? Of course. The other piece of soap reveals the answer. It being the other half of the soap on the table, in short, the victim was not eating soap at all. Oh, sorry. Mrs. Sholmes, but it's obvious, really, for no depths of hunger could drive any man to attempt to eat soap. Even I, with my unquenchable thirst for practical knowledge, took only a single bite. But that begs the question of how the man was poisoned, because there's no sign of any food on the table. An excellent observation, Mr. Naruhodo, one that furnishes us with the answer we seek. For London's foul soap is besmirched by poison. The victim's life was claimed by poison. Contents of the plate. How about contents of the cup? Mr. Sholmes is still pushing the soap argument then. Perhaps he's suggesting the man licked the soap rather than ate it. If soap in London is that poisonous, I don't think I want to be washing my hands with it. But there are no signs of any food in this room at all. Of course, food isn't the only thing that passes people's lips, is it? So, once again, we must look at the cup. Although, why can we turn around further now? Yes, a Western vessel for the serving of infusions of dried tea leaves. The Japanese have teacups. They don't look like that, but... It's a teacup, Mr. Naruhodo, as you well know. Stop putting on airs. And it's empty. So we've already established that the victim wasn't eating soap when he died. However, there's significant evidence to suggest he was drinking tea. My thoughts exactly. Okay, I guess that's the game's ham-fisted way of saying, pick the cup, dummy.
Take that!
Yes, the victim's life was claimed by poison that tainted the teacup. Indeed. Cups have been the vessel of choice for practicing poisoners over the centuries. And it would appear that this victim drank every last drop. There's no sign of food anywhere in the room. Which leads us to the immutable conclusion. The cause of death was clearly intoxication due to the ingestion of poison contained in this teacup. Go on. The cause of death identified, we proceed to Act 2, where we ponder the next question. Was this suicide or murder? Okay. The Western vessel for infused hot drinks again. It's already featured heavily in our deduction so far. Yes, we can imagine that shortly before his death, Mr. Shamspeare was having a drink of tea. There would be nothing remarkable about that, but what troubles me is Mr. Natsume's reaction when he heard Mr. Sholmes suggest it. There's more to this deduction than it seems. We must closely examine the scene of the crime again for some more clues. Okay. That would be his own teacup. It's another Western vessel of it. It's a teacup. And it, too, is empty. Given that he's actually holding this one in his hand, we can assume that this is the cup from which Mr. Shamspeare was actually drinking. Oh, sorry, it's wrong person. But if that's the case, this changes everything. Everything we've deduced up to now is turned on its head. I have a bad feeling about this. I almost don't want to say it. Yes, I know exactly how you feel. Okay, well, I guess we will just present that then.
Take that!
Did the man dine and die alone? The other teacup suggests the answer. Yes, there were 2 teacups in this room all along. In other words, this is a strong indication that at the victim's last supper, there was a guest present. At the very least, we can now say with certainty that somebody else was here in this room last night, taking tea with the victim.
What are you talking about? Utterly, unbelievably, unjustly unreasonable.
To draw a conclusion on such meager evidence would be foolish, however, certainly. In which case, what more can we deduce about this guest at the table? Well, allow me to lift the veil of doubt, my dear fellow. Do you mean to say you know exactly who was in this room at the time of the victim's death? Indeed, what reveals the answer, of course, is the broken lock. I'm not sure I like where this deduction is going now. I'm afraid it's too late to go back to the halcyon days of eating too much soap. But the identity of the guest who was in here last night when the victim passed away is something I have a very bad feeling about. Well, you can try to ignore your feelings, but we cannot ignore the truth, Mr. Naruhodo. No, I suppose not. Time to look around again. Oh dear, the latch is most definitely broken, isn't it? The door was kicked in by Mr. Natsume, according to Mr. Garadeb. According to what Mr. Garadeb told the inspector, who knew his short, thin little legs had so much strength in them. I'm not sure the length of his legs is in any way significant here. Perhaps this says more about the poor state of the door than about Mr. Natsume's strength, actually. Careful. If he overheard that remark, he'd almost certainly have a lively response. I don't know. Can this broken lock really tell us anything about who was here? Apparently not. The game is attempting to tell me otherwise. It's empty. Empty of liquid, but full of air. It makes you think, doesn't it? It makes me think that you're full of hot air. We should be thinking about who else was in the room at the time. Bother. Susato's quip in response was cleverer than my original riddle. Again, I think we're missing something in the translation there. I'm sure that was very funny in Japanese. Pile of books. At first glance, it seems that the only things in this room are the makeshift stage and the costumes. I overlooked these 3 books initially. I wonder what they are. Let's see. The titles read The Picture of Monsieur Lecoq, Canterbury Yearnings, and A Meal for Gaboriau. These are the books that What's-Her-Face had, yeah? Wait, I'm sure I've heard those titles before. It could just be an incredible coincidence, but they're the exact same 3 books that Mr. Natsume purchased the other day. What? Yes, on the day of the unfortunate incident when Miss Green was stabbed, Soseki-san had just been to the bookshop and bought them. That's right. And now those 3 titles are here in the room of the victim. Yet Mr. Natsume claims never to have been here before. But what does this mean, do you think? I really don't know what to make of it. Pile of familiar books. Well, I'm going to guess that that is what we were looking at. Candle? Candle? Candle. Let's look at the candle. Even Mr. Shamspear didn't eat candles, it seems. We've already established that he didn't eat soap either. Now, do you think perhaps the guest brought this candle here last night? Even if he or she did, does it reveal anything about the guest's identity? Good point. There goes my idea, snuffed out like that candle will be. If you sigh so deeply, Mr. Naruhodo, you're in danger of blowing out the flame. Okay, well, I think we've established what is actually the evidence here.
Take that!
Indeed, what reveals the answer, of course, is the pile of familiar books. Quite so, it's no mere coincidence that these 3 titles are here in this room. It's the link to the truth. Mr. Natsume, you purchased these books 4 days ago at a second-hand bookshop.
That's just coincidence.
In that case, you will be able to bring the same 3 titles from your own room, will you not? This very moment.
No, never, non-negotiable.
If you can't bring your own copies here, it proves that these 3 books are in fact yours. Having purchased the books 4 days ago and returned to your lodgings, you were arrested the very next day. So you could conceivably have brought the books here on that evening, but you never mentioned that. In other words, you could only have brought these 3 books here to the victim's room. Last night, having returned to your lodgings after the trial concluded at the Old Bailey. In short, there is only one possible conclusion. The victim died here in this room last night as a result of poisoning. And that same night, the victim had a visitor. And that visitor was you, Mr. Soseki Natsume. Thus concludes the final act of Sherlock Holmes's Great Deduction. Elementary.
Not again. Not again. Not again!
Well then, Mr. Natsume, it would appear you're going to have to accompany me down to the yard. Again.
But wait! Hold your horses.
Yes?
Door, key, locked, entry, exit, entirely impossible.
He's so flustered he's being even stranger than normal. What, do you think that's an alibi? You could have just made a copy.
What?
You live in the same building, after all. Yeah, that's absolutely true. I personally have a copy of all of the other people who live in this apartment, after all. You have had plenty of opportunity, I'm sure. But...
Misery me!
Sorry, sir, you'll get your chance to give your side of the story later. The facts speak for themselves, Mr. Mustache.
Ah, you horrible hairlock Sholmes.
He really has found himself an arch-rival now, hasn't he? Come now, no dilly-dallying. Outside, there's a carriage waiting.
Locum student Mr. Naruhodo Esquire. I never imagined I'd be in this position again, but... You have to help me, please, please, I'm innocent.
All right, I understand. We'll come to your cell later and talk about it.
And one more thing.
Oh, yes?
My poor little kitty cat. Please give him his breakfast for me.
And so, his evil curse still apparently unbroken, Soseki-san found himself once again the prime suspect in a case of murder. Thanks to the incriminating deduction of the great detective. My dear fellow, the honor belongs to you. I wonder if he actually did go to prison when he was here. Well, here. I don't live in Great Britain. When he was visiting. Let's find out. Soseki Natsume. Well, at least that means Inspector Gregson is no longer here. We can examine the crime scene in more detail now. Yes, that's right. Ah, and of course... What? Have you forgotten what the inspector mentioned before? It was the landlord, Mr. Garadeb, who discovered Mr. Shamspear. Ah, Mr. John Garadeb, yes. I expect we could find him in his sitting room on the top floor as usual. Right. We must remember to go and talk to him later, then. Okay. Well, let's ignore that for a moment. By the way, if you're interested, it appears that Mr. Natsume shows up on the front of the Japanese 1,000 yen note, which is $10. So there you go. United Kingdom, 1901 to 1903. Okay, well, there we go. I was always wondering what the date was. Here we go. So, let's see. He lived in 4 different lodgings, none of which are the ones portrayed in this game. Fun. Despite his poverty, loneliness, and mental problems, he has solidified his knowledge of English literature. It says nothing about him being arrested. He did have paranoia, though. Among English gentlemen, I lived in misery like a poor dog that strayed among a pack of wolves. Okay, he did not enjoy his time. Interesting. So, other thing, this is going to be faster if I just type this. So 1903, let's see, Sino-Japanese War was 1937. Oh wow, the first one was in 1894 to 95. Okay. So that explains a little bit more then about the earlier thing. It would have been several years after the First War. When was the Russo-Japanese War? 1904 to 1905. Ah, so that's why we were okay being on that Russian ship before, because we had not yet witnessed the battle. The battle doesn't take place until well after Soseki leaves Japan. So we're right in there. We're right in, because it was the Russo-Japanese War that ultimately precipitated everything that would lead to World War II, because it was the first time that an Asian nation had beaten a modern, quote-unquote, Western nation, even though Russia technically is in Asia. But that was the turning point in the modernization of Japan, where they were like, hey, we could actually stand up now to the Western powers. Very interesting period in history that led to many atrocities. Anyway, it's time to end this one here. I'll see you next time.